Radio Bath.
And we are here with Dr. Graham Abbey, CEO of Farleigh Performance. Hello, Graham. How are you?
Hello. I'm very good, thank you.
Good. It's really nice to have you on the show. And I'm looking forward to this session because a lot of businesses are waking up again, and they have woken up. And I think the temptation sometimes is like, all right, let's hit the numbers. We've lost all this money. And they sometimes go on panic mode. So creating a high performing team is really important. But first, let's get to know a little bit about you. How did you come to being in this industry? Tell us a bit more.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I've just listened to your session. I listened to you introduce me in that. It's kind of always funny to hear yourself being described, and also your challenge to us all. I think about reflecting on what who are we? What's our mission and purpose, and so on. So I find myself sort of changing what I was going to say a little bit based on that.
Well, good.
Well, it's kind of. You made me think about my upbringing somewhat. My father was a physicist, my mother a nurse. We moved around quite a bit with my father's work. And I sort of came of age, I think, as a young boy through playing rugby. That was the thing that I sort of found myself in somewhat. And those themes sort of kind of analysis, care, teams, collaboration, fitting in, belonging, feel as if, listening to you now, feel quite important things that shaped who I am. So right. I started, as you described, my working life, as an engineer, but got very early on got interested in people rather than things.
Yes.
And that interest in people and organizations and how they work has kind of stayed with me. That sort of staying curious has been a sort of theme, I think, through all my work and my life. And I had an early HR career, ending up at EasyJet, their first HR director, but also studied through that period, did an MBA and did a psychology degree. Really trying to get under the skin of what makes businesses tick and what makes people tick, and where the intersection is between those two things. And that's continued to stay with me in my work to this day.
Wow, that's
which has largely been consulting since the early 2000s. A small sort of route down a bit of a cul-de-sac into academia for a while, which was fascinating, and really continued to build on the work that I did in my PhD, which is now 10 years ago, more than 10 years ago that I finished that, 2010.
Wow.
Which is all around looking at how people make sense of change in organizations, and how they narrate that change, how they build their own stories. So again, it's got lots of echoes to what you've just been talking about how we build our own story and our own narrative, and how we lead and manage from that place.
That's really fascinating.
I think the other I should say is, I live here in Bath. I've been here for 14 years. I live here with my wife, Kate, who works for Bath Festivals. She's head of literature programming at Bath Festivals. Does an amazing job there. I have 3 children. Caitlin, who's 24, and is out in the world of work, finding her way. And then Dan, who's 16, and Nell, who's 12. So they're a very significant part of my life too.
That's fantastic. It's really nice to hear the person behind the business as well, behind the role, behind the position, right? And of course, I want to know more about how to create the high-performing team with inspirations from sport as well, because I didn't grow up with sport. And to be honest, the rugby thing, because I grew up in America, so it's like American football and everything like that, I never really understood the culture that rugby brings. And actually, I've been quite impressed by it, so that's why I also follow rugby games these days. But, I want to start by asking this question to you. How do you define high performance? Because I don't want us to just throw around this phrase right? And assuming that everybody has the same image in mind. How do you define it?
Yeah, no, that's an interesting question. I think at one level, everyone recognizes high performance when they see it, and or an absence of it when they don't. We held a roundtable discussion last week. Not that there was any round tables in sight, of course, at this time. And it was about high performing teams. And what was interesting was how easily everybody could describe what they believe a high performing team would be, and many common descriptors, trust, empathy, ease of conversation, engagement, tackling tough issues, and of course getting results. So it seemed that there was lots of clarity around what it is, but it was much more difficult for people to know how to get there.
Right.
So it feels as if high performing teams, one of the challenges is that it's not too complex to know where you want to be. It's not difficult to know where you want to be, but it seems to be quite challenging to get there. And I think, and that sort of digs in more deeply into this question of definition in a way. And I think one of the ideas that's helpful to understand the challenge of that is the idea of emergence, or emergence from complex systems. So, because I think that's what performance is. So performance, engagement, trust, and so on are all properties of this system of people and organizations that we work in. And we're doing things in those, and performance emerges from that.
Right.
And they emerge out of a sort of unseen interaction of all sorts of things.
So performance comes from process, right? A performance is not in itself a process, but it is a result of a process. That's interesting, because I also believe that I think people focus on results. That's fine, but what creates results is actually the process, and ultimately we need to understand the process that is required. What do you?
Well, exactly. It's and you and I have talked about this before. It's much more of a verb than a noun. So performance is something that's happening all the time. It's interesting. Mary Allbine, a US professor, talks about the distinction between complicated things and complex things, and she describes the easiest way to think of something that's very complicated is a jumbo jet, which is obviously appeals to me, given my kind of aeronautical engineering background.
Sure.
There's lots of moving parts. There's complex systems of connections, but it's made up a set of parts, and you can take it apart and you can put it back together again, and it goes in a very particular way. In contrast to mayonnaise. So jumbo jet is complicated, but mayonnaise is complex, because the properties of mayonnaise emerge as you mix oil into egg. Mm-hmm. And once you've got mayonnaise, you can't separate it back out into its parts again. They stop existing. And I think this is part of the challenge with things like performance, because it comes out of a complex system. And we want to, or what we desperately want to be able to do, is identify the components that made it up, to break the mayonnaise back out into saying, oh, well, there's some eggs in here and there's some oil. And actually, if we got a few fresher eggs or a bit better quality oil or whatever, we would get better performance. And of course, you can't do that, because performance is this kind of emergent property that forms out of all the parts that make up performance, but actually not in a simple way.
Wow, that's good. And when we come back, I want to discuss that mayonnaise a little bit more. What are the components? I'm going to make mayonnaise tonight just because you said that. But what are the components that creates performance? And I'm really looking forward to dig deeper into our conversation. But first, I did ask, as I do with all guests, their song choices. And you gave me the song, The Sultans of Swing by Dire Straits. And I want you to introduce this song before I play it. Tell me, what does this song mean to you?
It's interesting. I think it's an era, isn't it?
Oh yeah, definitely. Dire Straits.
I've read somewhere that we're very shaped by music when we're around the sort of age of 19, and I went to see Dire Straits when I was 19, live in '85 was the tour. So that sort of gives my age away. Seems an awful long time ago now. And I think it's just been a band I'd grown up with through the late '70s and into the '80s, and it was just one of those moments of going to Wembley and getting to see them, and then seeing them just a few days later in the Live Aid concert. And this was the song they played as part of Live Aid in July '85.
Of course, yeah.
And I kind of sort of stuck with me ever since.
Oh, cool. Well, my Dire Straits song is Money for Nothing. And I was sitting in front of the telly watching MTV. And I was, MTV, where did that go? I'm not that young either. But I remember it because it appealed to me because it was all these robots and cartoons and everything like that. And the song was great. But we're not going to play that. We're going to play Sultans of Swing. And that was Sultans of Swing by Dire Straits. And we're back with Dr. Graham Abbey. Wonderful analogy with mayo. And now we're going to have to dissect that mayo, unfortunately, or fortunately. What creates high performance, I think, is where we left off. So, tell us more. What do you think?
Yeah, I think if you accept the idea that high performance emerges out of a set of factors, then it shifts our focus onto the question of how do we create the conditions in which it can. And I think there are many different elements that make up the conditions that enable it to happen. And it's less about focusing on one or the other. I'm about to use the word secret sauce, which sort of feels inappropriate now. Now I've used mayo as an example, but we're drawn to try and find the secret sauce here. The way to develop something, and I think what my experience tells me is that's not only an illusion; it's quite a dangerous one. It draws us into particular spaces, and you see it in the world of consulting. You see consultants who focus heavily on systems and process, and you see consultants who focus heavily on mindsets and beliefs, and those that are more culturally based, those that are more focused on behaviors. And I think the challenge really here is you've got to hold all of those.
Yes.
I kind of noticed in you when you were talking earlier around purpose and the sort of almost the kind of trade-off between purpose and profit, and I think again, that's a mindset I think we have to get ourselves out of, and to really start to see that you've got to hold all of these. You've got to hold purpose and profit.
Absolutely.
And these things can, work in tandem with each other. They're all ingredients in the mix from which high performance can emerge. So that classic, that sort of having a map for that can really help. So the one we use is one developed by Ken Wilber, and it's his integral model, and he talks about the difference between individual and collective, and also interior and exterior. So things that might be in my inner world as an individual, like mindsets and beliefs, or those things that might be exterior to me, like my behaviors. And then at an organizational level, exterior things like systems and procedures, or kind of more interior collective things like a shared set of assumptions or a culture, something that's not tangible but is very present in what we have. Yeah. And he names those as the I, we, it, and its spaces, and we find that a really helpful way of thinking about what are where might the ingredients be that we need to pay attention to in order to build high performance.
Yeah, I mean, I always think about brain and heart, right? I mean, a lot of people come into the corporate world or in the business as they use their brain, processes, systems, procedures, rules, products. But at the same time, when you look at them having challenges with engagement or high-performing team, it's typically not because people aren't smart enough to create a high-performing team. It's because it's not they can't. It's because they will not. Or for some reason, something's blocking their will, not their skill, right? It's not about the brain and adding more things. And that's why training has its limitation. Training is great. It imparts skills. It develops people's skills, right? But it's, when you're dealing with high-performing team, it's about facilitating the reason why people want to be a high-performing team. Right. The brain, or is it more of a heart thing? And most of the times, 80% of the time, what I find is it's a more of a heart thing. What are some of the things? Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm going to say, and that, I think that's in part because we've classically relied on one of those more than the other. So I think where we've been is in a very sort of rational kind of post-industrial revolution world, as it were, where we've developed lots of systems and we've developed cultures in organizations which value that highly. And I think I have been seeing what happens in organizations when they connect to heart too. So your conversations around purpose, I think, are very central to the work that we do. I think really one of the challenges, as I've laid out these multiple elements that you need to focus on, is what holds them together. What
holds a team together?
What holds a team together? What holds an organization together? Mm-hmm. How can you, if these things need to be integrated and working with each other, what are they working towards? And increasingly questions of higher purpose come to that.
Yeah, exactly. So the organization itself needs to be clear on that higher purpose. Interesting. And when we start talking about purpose versus profit, that's why I also feel like, well, if that higher purpose is to be achieved, we do need people who care about the profit. We do need people who want to be high performers. Because there's also a lot of talk, in my opinion, of, now organizations need to care for their teams. But the organization have invested in their teams. They invest first. They pay you a salary first before you even perform, right? But at the same time, it is not always, in my opinion at least, it's not about the leaders in the organization caring for the teams all the time, but you need to also attract the teams that want to achieve that higher purpose, that want to be at their best. And that's why I think when the leader is also clear on their purpose and their mission, this, high-performing team sometimes starts with recruitment and selection.
I think so. And I think, as you described very beautifully around your own experience, you attract, you give off vibes both as individual recruiters and as organizations, and you sort of get what you deserve, if you like, in your, you attract those kinds of people. So I think really paying attention to what is it that what's the message you're giving out there? What are people, who are the sorts of people that you're attracting to your organization is very important, because those ingredients are important. They're an important part of the mix in terms of what comes out of performance.
Right. I want to link it to rugby a little bit, again, an interesting sport. And we did talk about this earlier, performance. I love that because they perform, don't they, on TV as well, and they perform. And let's say they miss a penalty kick. They need to switch their mind over, stop regretting that, move on, get the next point. And it is that switch. How do you use professional sport? I'm sure not just rugby, but professional sports. How do you find that's relevant to the corporate world and in performing?
Yeah. Well, I think there's lots of links. Firstly, and I think what sport does and what rugby, is a great example of it. Is it's a very visible playing field, if you like. We see teams performing week in, week out, and therefore it's they operate in a fairly unforgiving environment in that regard. and therefore have developed systems, processes, mindsets, all those things we were just talking about across all those different quadrants, to ensure that in the 80 minutes, in the case of a rugby, once a week, all the 10,000 minutes of work that you've done to get there come good. So there's lots of detail. I think I pick out two things, and you hinted at one of them there. I think if you think about what are the things that really help you then operate in this complex picture that we're painting, two personal skills which I see in sport a lot, I guess one's a practice and one's a mindset. So I think the mindset is based out of the work of Carol Dweck. There's this idea of growth mindset. Mm-hmm. And she distinguishes between the idea of having a way of thinking about the world that sees everything as opportunity to learn, and believing in learning and growth. Many ways in the way in which you were describing your own perspective on the world earlier, versus people who get into a fixed mindset and believe in talent or capability, or mm-hmm. Some people are good at some things and not good at others. And I think what we've seen in sport particularly is it's become a real area in which that idea of how do you build and maintain a growth mindset has come very visible. I mean, when you hear any athlete interviewed after a performance, they're always talking about their own performance against their own targets, how they did, what they're seeing they might do differently or better. So they are often focusing on that. How does this particular situation enable us to grow and improve, rather than did I do well or didn't I do well, which is much more of a fixed mindset. And I think the second area, the one that you hinted at, was this idea of sort of resourcefulness or emotional resilience. Anybody watching Bath at the moment and watching the game last Friday will have experienced that. The sort of the fine line between what a win and what a lose means, and a loss means, and seeing the emotional response from people to get over the line for a win, and in many ways that emotional charge of either a win or a loss, both of which are real imposters to your performance. I think must be a Churchill quote there somewhere, but they are neither of them are that helpful. Both of them lead you to being in a kind of emotional state that takes you away from your growth mindset. So the ability to be emotionally resilient, the ability to find a way to be more at your best more of the time, is probably if there were to be a secret sauce, having said there isn't one, that's probably one of the core personal practices that underpins your ability to perform.
Interesting. So is it like, if you fail, don't dwell on it, but if you succeed, also don't dwell on it. Just focus on the next process.
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit like you were describing earlier around process. I mean, we all react, and,
sure.
And I think resilience is not about curbing our reactions to things. I mean, firstly, life would be a really boring thing to live if we didn't ride that sort of roller coaster of highs and lows. So, our emotions are a real signal for us, to pay attention to, and we should allow ourselves to fully feel the good emotions and the what sometimes feel less helpful emotions.
Yes.
And we need to know how to process those, how to sit and notice those, and have those not kind of linger with us. There's a really interesting stat I heard the other day, which was, if we pay full attention to an emotion that's within us, it doesn't last more than 90 seconds. It's when we don't fully notice that, accept that, allow that to be within us. That can stay with us, and all the self-talk that then goes with it. So our challenges, our feelings then drive what we're saying to ourselves about things. And those can lead us either in a downward spiral or even an upward spiral. Can lead us, because the upward spiral, if you like, is towards another form of a fixed mindset. Oh, we're a great team. We're the best team. Well, that in many ways is taking us away from our kind of core process that got there. Actually, you know what? We did something really well, and we should celebrate that and notice that and cherish that and recognize we've got to return to our process.
Exactly.
Because next week there's another game.
That reset button is important, isn't it?
Yeah.
Allow yourself.
Whether it's in sport or business, there's always another game.
Exactly, and being ability to, the worst thing you can do if you want to get over something is to ignore it, because the monkey mind will keep coming back. But if you just allow yourself to feel whatever negative or positive emotion there is, live with it, celebrate it for a while, but then press the reset button. That's also good. I want to talk more about the keys to creating a high-performing team, and perhaps some of the work that you've been doing with clients, so that we get some concrete ideas of how that actually works. But first, again, I'm curious with your song choices. I've never heard of this one. Muse, Starlight by Muse. Sorry, sorry, I've just given that away. I want to talk about Katrina and the Waves. Muse is the next one. Walking on Sunshine. Tell me what that brings about for you.
All right. Well, you couldn't pick two more different examples here between Muse and Katrina and the Waves. I think. Well, Katrina and the Waves is again. I hadn't really noticed this until I'd sent you these suggestions. But this is also an experience of mine from 1985. This was. I was the University of Bristol rugby club captain in 1985, and one of the things we used to do on the side was provide the security at gigs at the university, and this was one of the gigs that I got to see I got paid to see in truth, and it's always been a song that's sort of stuck with me kind of ever since, in a way, and it's just such a feel-good song, and it feels right now as the sun is out here in Bath, and there is bright light on the sort of pandemic horizon. Hopefully, that a little bit of Walking on Sunshine would do us all a world of good.
All right, we're going to take Graham back to his university days, and we're going to celebrate the sunshine that we're experiencing today.
This is Radio Bath.
And we're still with Dr. Graham Abbey, CEO of Farleigh Performance, sister company of Bath Rugby. We've been talking about how to bring the lessons we get from professional sports into our corporation. And maybe you can just help us understand a little bit more about how these ideas come to life by telling us a bit about what you do for your clients. What are some examples?
Yeah, I think to follow the thread through around high-performing teams, and this is one of the ways we often get to work with our clients. I mean, we also work with clients who are really interested in the questions of purpose. So some of our clients come to us who are really exploring some of those bigger questions of why we exist, where does our organization fit in this kind of new and complex world that we're living in. And we also get clients that come to us with challenges around growth and specific business issues in terms of how they live with the new growth that they've found, or they seek new growth that they need. But often somewhere in the middle of all of that, we're working with leaders in groups with their teams, to build high performance. So it's hard for an organization to perform well if its leadership team isn't performing well. And you could say the same for a department, and so on. So very practically, often we come back to some of the work we're doing is around building a capability in a team. And I think that the example that comes to mind actually is from a from a finance team. It was a finance team in a FTSE 250 business, a £3 billion business, a UK PLC. And there was actually a lack of performance showing up for this team, both in their results, the organisational's financial results, but more a series of unwelcome surprises that they were getting. They weren't on top of the finances, as it were, so things were happening in bits of the business that they didn't know about. But also in their ways of working and being with each other, and it was a troubled, and I think some would call it sort of dysfunctional team.
Yes.
And I think there were 3 steps that come to mind in the work that we did with them. And first step was all around confronting reality. So, finding a way to get that group of people in a room together and to play back to them essentially what they were all saying to themselves and what their internal and external customers were saying about them. So often we distort or hide from some of the sort of underlying truths of our performance or our behaviour or what's going on. So often we are finding ways to have people really see that. And again, there's a really nice parallel to the rugby world where after each game, they go through in some real detail. Dan Cooper, who's a great head of analysis at Bath Rugby, will take the team through, look, this is what happened. And there's nowhere to hide from that. So confronting reality's first step. Second step is then awakening possibility. So if that's where we are, what could we be? So only confronting the reality is hard to energize people about simply moving away from things. We know that in our own lives, whether it's trying to get fit or lose weight or moving away from things only takes us so far. We've got to have something that we're moving towards. So in this instance, we helped them come together around a new purpose for themselves and start to name that. It's very memorable. They named it, they wanted to be truth tellers, which is just a kind of really lovely image for them as a finance function and really related to the business problems that they were facing and the sense that the truth wasn't being told in the business, but wasn't being told between themselves. They weren't really facing into that. So it was a purpose that really worked with them. So confronted the reality, awakened possibility, and finally, the third step is really having them ground that in doing something. So identifying the work that we need to do and being able to start straight away. I remember, I think we'd started with them with a couple of days workshop, and their CEO coming in the middle of that, sort of hear progress and what they were doing. And one of the things that they decided to do was they would start to live their truth telling straight away and really share some kind of home truths with the CEO around his behaviour and how they found that unhelpful. So they sort of really stepped in from the outset. So there's a need to really start to get these big ideas into very practical things very early.
Very interesting. And it just remind me of Patrick Lencioni's book, The Dysfunctional Team, because you start with the reality, getting them to understand the reality. And sometimes when you lack trust within an organization, there is a fear of conflict, isn't there? There's a fear of, here's the truth. I don't want to tell the truth because people get offended and I'm not sure what my relationship will be with people if I tell the truth. But it is that necessary step. And I love what you said also about once we've got the reality, we awaken the possibility. And it's also about doing something. And what I find in working with organizations on their leadership change and everything like that, it's a lot of people say, I want my team to be something. I want my team to be high performing. I want my leaders to be inspiring or empowering or whatever it is to be. But I always tell them, well, tell me what that behavior looks like. Tell me what needs to change. What do they need to start doing and stop doing? That's more helpful than telling them to be something. Well, what do you want them to do better? or do more of or less of. And I like that final thing is about actually understanding what is the actual action that you need to get from the reality to the possibility.
I think that's right, and we can go. You start to see a couple of things that we've been talking about during this last hour here. To be able to do that as a team, it's helping people really manage their resourcefulness, and their emotional resilience while doing that. So typically, we would also be working on that as a capability for people during this time.
Sure.
Because it sounds very easy now to say, let's confront the reality. But it's not that people don't know that. They're just fearful of what the consequences are of naming some of those things, because some of those might be difficult conversations that need to be had. And we get triggered by that. We get to the stage of not being at our best, and those become very difficult conversations to have then in that context.
Well, and you also say that at the end of it, at least in that finance company, they had to talk to the CEO and tell him or her what they were doing that wasn't very productive. So it also starts from the leader, doesn't it? What work do you do first with that CEO before you get to the team?
Yeah, and the relationship between those. So I think with all of these, how you're recognizing the various things in the wider system that are holding your current performance in place. So it comes back to that other point of if systems, culture, mindsets, behavior, they're all at play here. And unfortunately, shifting any one of those is unlikely to be enough for a sustained change in performance. You need to be looking for the ways in which it's not only what we do, but also the way we think.
Yeah.
And how are we thinking about our role? I mean, one of the big things for this team was their role in the organization.
Yeah.
And that shift to truth tellers is a very different role. It's a different mindset from being money counters, for example, which a sort of internal finance team could implicitly be holding as their purpose. Our purpose
Sure.
is to be the custodian of the money. And building that sort of generative image, to give it a technical term, a sort of idea that creates movement and excites people and pull people towards a different set of behaviors is very powerful in this. And that's often what we're doing when we work with purpose.
That's fantastic.
It's creating something that is a real pull for people.
Yeah, that's good. I love your holistic approach to the issue. It's not just one angle. It's top down, all around, inside out. It's different aspects. So there isn't one truth. There isn't one way. And what seems to be happening with your organization is you really take the time to research all the angles at the possibilities, and then slowly, one step by step, work with the organization. I can imagine this kind of engagement lasts a few months, or how long typically do you need? I mean, I guess it depends on the situation, but typically a minimum.
It does. I mean, generally, my slightly flippant answer is generally longer than people are willing to give us. So I think it is part of the challenge, because what we're talking about here is typically long-term systemic change.
Sure.
And of course, often we come to things in a panic or with a very real and very immediate issue we need to deal with. And we always focus in on those issues because it is what's most pertinent today that is the place where you'll get most shift and change. But to recognize much of this is needs to be built over time. And this finance team is a good example of it. We worked with them for a couple of days, made a real difference. But we ended up working with them over a 3-year period, and we met with them. In the end, we're meeting sort of once a year for a couple of days to review where they are and what was next for them, and so on. But we did a series of things, and those series of things also led to some other things, because what started to emerge here, for example, was the recognition that corporate purpose, was ripe for being redefined and reclarified. And actually, it was the finance team that really led this whole organization towards a bigger refocusing of what they were doing. So often we are, as you say, really trying to link multiple things together. And I think one of the big things we're linking more and more is recognizing that organizations are not islands in themselves. Often when we think about teams or organizations, we put fixed boundaries around our organizations. And of course, they exist in a much wider ecosystem. If we get anything out of this last year or so, I think that's got to be one of the kind of major lessons of just how connected and interconnected we all are.
Right.
So really helping organizations look up and out and see their place in their system, their industry, their society, their communities, and seeing the ways in which you can help connect to those, both to make a difference to those systems and communities, but also to drive the financial sustainability of the organization. Because we won't change the world unless we can do so in a way that's sustainable. And that sustainability requires money. And
exactly.
Those things, this is why, for me, the big excitement. I mean, I describe our purpose here at Farleigh Performance as to make purposeful performance commonplace. And I think it's through that we really can, as business, change the world.
Perfect. On that note, it's been lovely to have you here. It's been lovely to have you here. I like the conversation. And yes, it does take time. I'm reminded of when, back in the days when I wasn't so fit, I went to this gym and I talked to the guy who is the fitness, the trainer, the personal trainer. And I said, I'd like to register for a personal training program. He says, right, good. And we did all the measurements and everything. And I said, well, how long do you think I can get to my ideal weight? And he said, I'll give it 3 months if you come in at least 3-4 times a week. And I said, 3 months? That's a long time, And then he gave me his cheeky answer. He says, well, how long did it take you to get unfit? And I said, well, years. Sometimes we just want that quick fix, where in fact the problem has been there for probably a lot longer than the solution will take, but we just need to get there. How can people contact you and your team if they want to talk more about this?
Well, I'd love it if they did, and I'm always happy to talk to anybody about this type of stuff. Our website is www.farleighperformance.com. Farleigh as in Farleigh House or Farleigh Hungerford, Leigh. You can email me. Unsurprisingly, it's Graham Abbey at farleighperformance.com. We're also on LinkedIn under Farleigh Performance, on Twitter with the handle of @FarleighPerform. And you can also follow me on Twitter at Dr. Graham Abbey, Dr. Graham Abbey. So between that,
We'll manage. The easiest one is just find you on LinkedIn, Graham Abbey, and all the other links will probably be there as well. So, thank you so much for being here. I've learned so much from you, and it's I wish you all the best and your team all the best in helping change the world through business. It's been a pleasure.
It's been a real pleasure for me too. Thank you.
All right, good. So let's take a quick break and we'll be back after this.
This is Radio Bath.